Why did she always feel the silence more than anyone else? Sat in the commander's seat of the armored vehicle, the map spread across her lap, its creases damp with sweat that no amount of shifting could dry. The hum of engines pressed into her ears like a constant reminder that motion was no guarantee of safety. The convoy moved slow, deliberate, stretched thin across the rocky valley. Dust clung to every surface, coating uniforms, weapons, even the breath inside their lungs until swallowing felt like chewing sand. The others glanced at the in silence. Sunglasses masked their eyes but not their nerves. Shoulders stiffened at every creak of steel, every faint rattle of gear. Machine gun barrels swept the horizon in tired arcs, as if those gunners were trying to hold back fate with nothing more than motion. His gaze lingered on the locals standing in the shade of a crumbling wall, still, watching, not one wave, not one nod. She knew that stillness. Villagers turned their eyes away before violence. Their silence could be more dangerous than shouting. She told herself it was nothing, but her chest tightened anyway. She touched the map again, finger tracing the printed roads like an anchor in a storm. Order on paper was her comfort, even when the world beyond it refused to obey. Calm was never safety. Calm was only a lie. The radio crackled in short bursts, routine calls layered with static, and then silence again. That silence felt like a trap. She pressed the handset against her lips, gave her check-in, her tone steady, though her pulse betrayed her. Why did quiet always feel like the breath before a scream? The explosion came like thunder, tearing the sky in half. The lead vehicle lifted in a fireball, steel disintegrating in a storm of dust and flame. For half a second the world froze, then chaos crashed in like a flood. The shockwave rattled her chest, sent her map crumpling against her legs. The radio erupted in overlapping shouts, the gunner above her screamed contact, and the convoy shattered into panic. Another rocket streaked from the ridges, its smoke twisting across the horizon before slamming into a truck 3 vehicles ahead. Metal split open, bodies hurled into the dust. Screams cut through the roar of engines and gunfire. His hand clenched the handset, her other bracing against the dash. Her voice burst out, sharp and clipped, cutting through the storm. Return fire, spread out, maintain spacing. No one saw the tremor in her hands. No one heard the knot in her throat. Her words had to be steel because hesitation meant collapse. Machine guns answered, a chorus of violence hammering the tracers ripped through the smoke, streaks of red and green searing the dust-thick sky. Enemy fire answered in kind, rounds slamming into armor, sparking across glass, shredding the earth where soldiers scrambled for cover. She forced herself to see, to process, to decide. Muzzle flashes on the right, shadows flickering between rocks. Her voice snapped orders, shift fire, right flank coordinates. Her turret answered instantly, hammering the slope. But another rocket screamed in, striking the truck to their left. Flame burst skyward, the blast rattling bolts loose in her own MRAP. The radio filled with voices, some calling positions, some begging for help, some screaming in pain. Raised her voice higher, sharper, commanding silence. Hold sectors, suppress left ridge, medic forward now. The fragility of order trembled in her voice, but it held. Dust turned the valley into blindness. Visibility shrank to silhouettes lit by fire. Her gut twisted when she saw a burning truck ahead, its ammunition cooking off in violent bursts, soldiers dragging their wounded in the haze. For a breath she wanted to close her eyes, but leadership didn't allow that. Leadership meant standing when others fell. The storm did not relent. Tracers carved the sky. Machine guns thundered until the air itself shook. Soldiers coughed dust and blood, sprinting between cover, firing blindly toward the heights. His voice threaded through it all, the fragile thread of order. Each command was a lifeline, each syllable carrying the weight of lives. She barked, spacing again, her throat raw, her chest burning, but her words did not crack. And then the sound came. Not enemy fire, something deeper. a low, rising thrum that pressed through the chaos and shook the bones of everyone on the ground. The gunship's grip tightened on the handset. She gave coordinates, precise and urgent. She prayed her voice carried through the static. The Apache appeared through the haze, a predator cutting through fire and dust. Rotor wash whipped the valley into a storm, sand clawing at skin, blinding already burning eyes. Soldiers looked up as if salvation had descended from the sky. The first strike ripped into the ridges, fire and stone raining down. Enemy silhouettes vanished in an instant, swallowed by flame. A cheer rose from the convoy, desperate, ragged, but alive. Allowed herself 1 second to breathe, just one, then her eyes hardened again. Because salvation could kill as easily as it saved. The gunship circled, its shadow sweeping across the wreckage like a dark omen. Her voice cut through the roar of blades, feeding coordinates, holding the blade of salvation steady. Each word was command, each command a plea. Inside, doubt pressed against her ribs. Could she hold it together? Could her voice be enough to balance between destruction and survival? She swallowed the fear. She forced steel into her tone. Because leadership did not mean certainty. It meant clarity and blindness. And as long as her voice reached through the dust, they still had a chance. What if salvation arrived only to test the strength of your trust? The roar of the Apache thundered above them, its rotors tearing the dust into violent spirals that swallowed everything in sight. The sky disappeared, replaced by a storm of grit and sand that burned the lungs and blinded already stinging eyes. Soldiers ducked, shielding their faces, yet their weapons stayed raised toward the ridges. They knew the fight wasn't finished. Held the radio handset so tight her knuckles whitened through her gloves. Her voice punched into the storm, coordinates clear and clipped, each number a razor's edge. She knew the pilots couldn't see the ground the way she could. They needed her clarity, and if her voice cracked, if one digit wavered, the very machine they prayed for could tear her people apart. The Apache's cannon opened up, bursts hammering the dirt and rock exploded outward, enemy positions collapsing in seconds. Cheers burst through the static, ragged, desperate, a momentary spark of hope. Let it wash over her only briefly before shutting it out. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to hesitation. And then it happened. A rocket slammed into the valley wall less than 100 meters from her squads. The shockwave ripped through the convoy like a hammer. Soldiers staggered, some falling flat against the dust. The radio filled with panic, shouts of being overrun, cries for fire to shift, voices layered in fear until meaning dissolved. His throat burned as she screamed into the handset, "Hold fire, hold fire." The Apache broke off, its guns falling silent. The dust hung heavy with the weight of near disaster. She could almost hear the thoughts in the minds of her soldiers. The savior above had nearly become their executioner. Her chest ached with the burden of command. How much could they trust the fire raining from above? How much depended on her voice threading the needle between salvation and friendly fire? She forced her breathing to slow, forced her words to come clearer, sharper, slower. Each coordinate spelled out as if her life depended on it, because it did. More than that, it was the lives of every man and woman crouched in the valley below her. Another burst of cannon fire, this time precisely where she demanded. Enemy silhouettes crumpled, their fire weakening. Soldiers found courage again, answering with their own bursts. The convoy was no longer collapsing, but clinging to fragile rhythm. Still's heart pounded with each call. She knew one mistake meant disaster. Leadership wasn't just command. It was a gamble with human lives as the stakes. The wind shifted, thinning the dust enough for her to glimpse the ridges again. She caught sight of a squad dragging their wounded behind a wrecked vehicle. The medic crouched low, hands moving fast. The sight nearly broke her composure. Blood soaked the sand, a sharp red against the brown. A rifle lay half buried nearby, abandoned by the man now gasping for life. She wanted to run to them, but she couldn't. Command bound her to the radio, to the map blurred by sweat and dirt across her lap. Her duty wasn't a rifle or a bandage, it was her voice, and her voice had to be unshakable. The Apache circled lower, its shadow stretching across the valley like a predator poised to strike, clenched her teeth. The pilots demanded fresh coordinates, their tone urgent, their trust in her absolute. How did they not hear the screams in her headset? How did they not feel the heat of the burning trucks? They were above the storm, blind to its cost. She was the bridge. She carried the weight of translation, turning chaos into clarity, screams into numbers, blood into grids. Her voice sharpened. Shift fire left Mark II now. The gunship obeyed. Rockets streaked from its wings, detonating across the slope in brutal rhythm. For a moment, the ground itself seemed to fracture. Enemy fire thinned further, their positions collapsing under overwhelming force. Yet's relief never came. She knew how close it still was. The line between enemy and friendly was razor thin. Her people were pressed tight against those same ridges. A single slip of her tongue, a single misheard grid, and the fire that saved them would consume them. She pressed the radio harder to her mouth, almost whispering as if the intimacy of her tone could cut through the chaos more surely than a shout. Each syllable carried the weight of dignity, of duty, of fear she refused to admit. The convoy began to move again, inching forward through the valley. Engines roared, wheels grinding over broken rock and shell casings, barked for spacing, demanding discipline, refusing to let them collapse into a vulnerable cluster. She caught sight of two soldiers hauling a comrade whose uniform was torn and bloodied. His rifle clung in his limp hands as if he refused to release it even in unconsciousness. The sight burned into her, resilience made flesh. Was that what she looked like to them? A symbol, a voice refusing to drop even under fire. Her throat stung, her eyes blurred, but her words never faltered, because leadership meant hiding the cost. The Apache strafed again, carving fire into the far ridge, timed her gunners to unleash bursts in rhythm with the air support, overlapping destruction until the enemy's fire broke apart. The haze lifted slowly, sunlight piercing through smoke. For the first time since the ambush began, the pressure lessened. The enemy was faltering. Their volleys grew thinner, their silhouettes retreating between rocks. The convoy no longer felt like prey, it moved like a force regaining ground. Leaned back for half a second, exhaustion pressing into her bones. Her gloves were slick with sweat, her throat raw, her body trembling from the weight of endless decisions. But she pressed forward, her voice steady, her commands crisp. Because clarity was all they had left. The gunship circled one final time, unleashing rockets that silenced the last holdouts on the ridges. Then it banked away, rotors thundering into the horizon, leaving the valley in a silence so heavy it pressed down on the chest. Stared at the wreckage. Burned vehicles stood like tombs, smoke curling into the dimming sky. Soldiers slumped against armor, weapons loose in exhausted hands. The medic moved from one wounded to the next, face streaked with dust and blood. Set the map across her lap once more. Its lines were smudged beyond recognition, but she wrote anyway, her hand trembling as she marked the report. Numbers, casualties, coordinates. Proof that order still lived, even when the world had shattered. The sun dipped low, shadows stretching across the valley. Dust clung to her skin, her teeth, her very breath. She whispered nothing, only stared at the ground they had held. It was not peace, it was survival, the kind that never truly leaves. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout. It whispers through grit and silence, carrying the weight of voices that almost broke. And she carried them all. Why did survival always feel heavier than death? The battlefield was quiet now, but not silent. Smoke hissed from burning vehicles, curling into the dimming sky like unanswered prayers. Shell casings lay scattered across the sand, clinking under boots that dragged more than they stepped. Soldiers slumped against armor, their bodies caked in dust, eyes vacant as if staring at something far beyond the valley. Sat in her seat, headset still pressed against her ears though the radio had gone silent. The silence wasn't peace. It was the hollow space where voices should have been voices that would never answer again. She set the map on her lap. The paper was nearly destroyed, smudged with blood, sweat, and dirt. Still, she forced herself to write the numbers. Wounded, dead, vehicles lost. Each mark steady, though her hand trembled with fatigue. The report wasn't for her. It was for command, for the faceless system that demanded proof that order existed, even when chaos had left its scars. A medic crouched nearby, his gloves slick with blood as he wrapped bandages with the urgency of someone trying to hold back the inevitable. His face was streaked with grime, his eyes hollow, yet his hands moved with precision. Watched him for a moment, too long, guilt pressing sharp against her ribs. She was alive. She was unhurt. And he was trying to pull life back from the edge with nothing but torn fabric and will. The gunner climbed down from her vehicle, his hands shaking as brass casings clattered from his gear. He leaned against the tire, helmet tilted back, breath ragged. His eyes met hers only for a second, then dropped. She wondered if he blamed her, for the chaos, for the blood, for the near misses from the gunship that had almost cut them down. The truth was simple. She blamed herself enough for all of them. She closed her eyes just for a moment. Behind the lids came images she couldn't shut out, the fireball swallowing the lead vehicle, the silhouettes flickering between ridges, the scream of rockets too close to her people. And then the silence that followed, filled not with triumph but with loss. The radio crackled suddenly, making her flinch. A call from rear command demanding a situation report. His throat tightened. She forced her voice steady, answering in clipped, precise words. She gave them numbers, coordinates, status. She did not give them grief. Because grief didn't belong on the airwaves. Grief was private. Grief was dangerous. She lowered the handset, her gloves stained, her pulse still hammering. For a moment she wanted to tear the headset off, throw the map aside, step out of the armored shell and just breathe air that didn't taste like dust and smoke. But command didn't allow that. Leadership meant staying in place, visible, immovable, even when she wanted to collapse. A soldier approached the vehicle, his uniform ripped, his face streaked with blood that wasn't his. He stopped by her door, stood at attention though his body wavered. "Ma'am," he said, voice cracked, "orders." She looked at him. He was young, younger than she wanted to remember. His eyes were raw, asking for more than orders. He was asking for certainty, for reassurance that the chaos was over, that someone still held control. Gave him what he needed. Orders steady and clear. Move the wounded to the rear. Reestablish spacing. Prepare to push forward. Her voice carried weight, even when her chest felt hollow. He nodded, saluted, and turned away. Only then did let her shoulders sink back against the seat. Her body ached from hours of tension. Her throat burned from shouting. And somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered the truth she wouldn't speak aloud. She wasn't sure how much longer she could hold the mask. The convoy began to move again, crawling out of the kill zone with deliberate pace. Engines groaned, wheels grinding through ruts and wreckage. Each truck bore scars, bullet holes, shattered glass, smoke-stained armor. The soldiers inside them bore worse. As they rolled forward, the sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the valley. The air cooled, but the silence carried a different weight now. No one spoke over the radios. No one joked or cursed or filled the void with nervous chatter. It was as if words themselves had burned away in the fire. Watched the horizon, her eyes fixed but unfocused. She thought about the villagers she had seen before the ambush, standing still, their faces hidden. Had they known? Had they chosen silence because they feared the cost of warning? Or had their silence been complicity? The question dug into her chest. She didn't want the answer. One of her drivers broke the radio silence. A hesitant voice, asking if the Apache would return if they were hit again, hesitated before replying. She wanted to say yes, wanted to promise the sky would answer again. But she couldn't, not after seeing how close salvation had come to killing them. Her answer was steady, clipped, almost cold. "We rely on ourselves first." The words hung heavy in the cabin. She wondered if the driver heard the weight behind them, the unspoken truth, that sometimes salvation was a blade, and sometimes command meant steering that blade so it didn't cut your own. The convoy crept out of the valley as night bled into the sky. Stars began to pierce the horizon, faint against the lingering smoke. The desert grew colder, each gust of wind carrying grit that scratched at exposed skin. His body longed for rest, but her mind stayed sharp. Every ridge, every shadow pressed into her vision. She couldn't stop watching, couldn't stop listening for the silence that always came before the scream. She knew her soldiers felt the same. Their eyes darted, their hands never far from triggers. The ambush had passed, but the memory clung, and memories had a way of returning in the worst ways. She thought about what it meant to lead, to carry their trust, to balance salvation and disaster with nothing but a voice. She thought about the faces of the wounded, the ones they couldn't save, the weight of each name she'd already written on her report. And she thought about the one truth she couldn't speak. Survival wasn't victory. Survival was debt. Debt you carried into the next fight, hoping you'd never pay it with interest. As the night deepened, the convoy pressed on. Engines droned steady, the sound both comforting and haunting. It was the sound of life continuing, fragile but unbroken. Leaned forward, her headset pressed tight, her voice low but steady as she gave the next check-in. Her words flowed calm, but inside she carried the storm. Because leadership wasn't about being fearless. It was about carrying fear so others didn't have to. And she carried it alone. What if the silence wasn't an end, but only the beginning of another trap? The convoy pressed forward under the weight of night, engines humming steady, headlights cutting thin beams through dust that seemed endless. The desert had swallowed the sun, leaving only the glow of stars and the faint crescent of a moon that offered no warmth. Shadows stretched across the ridges, longer than before, sharper than before. Every one of them felt alive. Leaned forward in her seat, headset tight, eyes burning from hours without blinking enough. Fatigue whispered at her edges, but fatigue was a liar. It told you to relax when danger sharpened. She knew better. She had seen too many ambushes begin when exhaustion softened discipline. The radio crackled with a voice, one of her squad leaders reporting spacing, checking bearings, confirming wounded accounted for. His words were steady, but beneath them heard it, the unspoken tremor of fear. They had survived one storm, but no one believed the night would grant them mercy. She answered with calm precision, her tone sharper than she felt inside. "Maintain discipline, eyes on the ridges, keep it moving." Outside her window, she caught sight of a soldier walking beside a vehicle, his silhouette barely visible in the dust. His rifle hung heavy at his chest, his boots dragging slightly with each step. She knew that look, a body moving forward because stopping meant collapse. She wanted to tell him to climb back inside, to rest for even a moment. But she didn't. Rest was a luxury they hadn't earned yet. The ridges loomed closer as the road narrowed, pressing the convoy into a choke point. His gut tightened. She raised the handset. All vehicles tighten spacing but keep distance for maneuver, eyes sharp. This is prime ground for a hit. Her voice carried over the static, steady but edged with steel. She couldn't let them hear doubt, not when every shadow might conceal the muzzle flash that would undo them. For a moment the night was only engine noise and wind, but thoughts churned. The villagers from earlier, their silence, their stillness. Had they been part of the ambush? Had they been paid? Threatened? Or had they simply watched, powerless, as war rolled past their homes again and again? The question gnawed at her. She hated not knowing. In war, ignorance was just another enemy. A flicker of light caught her eye, high on the ridge, small, barely there. She froze. Was it a reflection, glass-catching moonlight, or the glint of a scope? Her breath hitched, but her voice didn't waver. Right ridge, possible eyes, gunners scan. Machine gun barrels tilted upward, cutting arcs through the dark. The convoy slowed, engines growling as drivers hesitated. Clenched her fist. Hesitation was a disease, contagious, deadly. Keep moving, she ordered, sharper this time. Don't give them the stop they want. For a long moment, nothing happened. Just wind across stone, engines grinding and hearts pounding in unison. Then a sound cut the night, faint, metallic. A single shot. The round sparked off the armor of the lead truck, ricocheting into the dark. Immediately, the ridges lit up. Muzzle flashes burst like fireflies in the distance, streams of tracer rounds slicing down toward the road. The ambush had returned, the valley alive with fire once more. The convoy erupted in chaos. Gunners fired upward, their barrels spitting fire in desperate rhythm. Soldiers shouted through radios, their words tripping over one another in panic. Pulse spiked, but her voice cut through. Suppress fire, sectors, keep rolling. The trucks lurched forward, some swerving, others slowing. Dust whipped higher, turning the choke point into blindness. The enemy had chosen their ground well, high angles, narrow road, no cover for the vehicles below. Pressed her eyes against the haze, searching for patterns. The shots weren't random. They were controlled, disciplined. Whoever was up there knew what they were doing. Her throat burned. Left gunners raked that ridge, right flank heavy suppression now. Machine guns answered, thunder rolling across stone. The night lit with tracer arcs, each one carving lines of fire into the ridges. But for every enemy muzzle that fell silent, two more lit up. The radio shrieked with overlapping calls. One squad screaming for a medic, another begging for heavier fire, a driver shouting that his axle was hit. His mind split into fragments, each voice a demand, each demand a life. She forced herself to breathe once steady before shouting back. Orders clipped, prioritized, cold. Inside, she wasn't cold. Inside, her chest burned with the weight of choosing who would wait and who would be saved first. But command didn't allow the luxury of mercy in real time. Mercy was for later. Her gunner screamed down that his weapon was overheating. Brass casings clattered against the roof in a storm. She shouted for short bursts, controlled fire, then switched channels to call for mortar support. Her voice cracked for half a beat, but she forced it steady again. And then the memory hit her. The gunship. The Apache wasn't there. They were alone now. She clenched the radio, a hollow ache spreading in her chest. The silence above was louder than any gunfire. No salvation circling this time. Just them. Just her. She felt the weight of every eye in the convoy, though none could see her face. They listened to her voice, trusted it, needed it. And so she gave them steel. Push forward, suppress, clear this choke. We break through or we die here. The convoy obeyed, discipline holding fragile but real. Engines roared louder, pushing against fear. Gunners shifted fire in controlled arcs, their tracers carving the night into fragments. Soldiers leaned from hatches, rifles spitting into the ridges. The enemy pressed harder, their fire precise, coordinated. But's voice threaded through the storm, weaving order from chaos. She shifted squads, redirected gunners, forced momentum forward. Every command carried cost. Every choice was a gamble, but hesitation would have killed more than any bullet. The road finally widened ahead, the choke point breaking open into a plateau. Vehicles surged through, some limping, some smoking, all but alive. Gunfire faded as the convoy pushed out of range. The enemy didn't pursue. They had made their point. Slumped against her seat, headset still pressed to her ears, the radio filled now only with ragged breathing and the occasional clipped. Her chest felt heavy. She had held them together again, but at what cost? She looked down at the map in her lap, its lines smeared into nothing. Her pen hovered above it, too heavy to move. She couldn't bring herself to write the numbers yet. Not this time. Outside, soldiers tended to the wounded. Medics knelt in the dust, their hands moving with quiet desperation. A man screamed once, then went silent. Another whispered for water, his words fading into the night. Closed her eyes. The sound of the gunship still haunted her ears, even in its absence. The salvation that had nearly destroyed them. The silence that had abandoned them now. And she wondered, not for the first time, how much longer her voice could carry them through storms made of dust, fire, and doubt. Why did silence feel more dangerous when it followed chaos? The desert night stretched wide, the horizon nothing but shadows pressed against darker shadows. The convoy had pushed free of the choke point, its engines carrying them into open ground, but no one relaxed. Not really. The air was colder now. Dust clung to skin, stung eyes, coated the inside of mouths until swallowing was like grinding grit. Soldiers sat slumped inside vehicles, rifles across their laps, eyes staring forward but unfocused. They looked alive, but only barely. Stayed in her seat, headset still pressed against her ears though the radio was quiet. She should have felt relief. They had survived again, but relief didn't come. It never did. Her pen hovered above the battered map. She forced herself to write. Wounded, dead, ammunition low, vehicles crippled. Each number carved into the paper like a scar. She kept her hands steady, though her chest felt heavier with each stroke. Across from her, the driver stole glances in the mirror. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white on the wheel. She knew what he was thinking. He had heard the panic. He had felt how close they had come to breaking. And he was right. Pressed her hand against the dashboard, grounding herself. The gunship had left them. The enemy had pressed them. And her voice had been the only thread holding them together. But threads fray. Threads snap. She closed her eyes for a moment. Behind her lids came memories she hadn't invited. A younger years ago, standing at her first briefing table. She had been ignored then. Overlooked. The men around her had spoken over her words, dismissing her caution, laughing at her questions. She remembered the sting of it, the quiet vow she had made that day, that she would never let silence take her voice again. That vow had carried her here, to this valley, to this convoy, to this moment where her voice had meant life or death. But vows had a cost. The radio crackled suddenly, pulling her back. A squad leader checking in. His tone was clipped, but she heard it again, the fatigue, the fear, the desperate need for direction. She gave him orders. Move the wounded to the center, keep security tight on the flanks, eyes forward. Her voice was calm, measured. It sounded like control. But inside she was drowning. She glanced at the gunner who had climbed down earlier. He sat on the ground now, back against a wheel, helmet in his lap. His hands trembled as he rolled brass casings between his fingers. He didn't look at her. Didn't need to. She could feel his exhaustion, his doubt. And she wondered how much longer any of them could carry this. The convoy slowed to a halt in a shallow depression, engines idling low. Soldiers dismounted, setting a loose perimeter, weapons cradled in tired hands. Medics worked under dim red lights, wrapping bandages, stitching wounds, giving water to those who could still drink. Stepped out of her vehicle, boots sinking into dust that seemed to swallow everything. The air was sharp with the smell of burned metal and blood. She pulled her scarf across her face, but it didn't help. Some smells never left. She walked the line slowly, her shadow stretching long under the moon. Soldiers looked up when she passed, their eyes hollow but searching. She gave them nods, brief words of reassurance. She touched a shoulder here, a sleeve there. Small gestures, but they mattered. She knew they mattered. When she reached the medic station, she crouched beside a young man lying on his back. His chest was wrapped in blood-soaked gauze, his breathing shallow, each inhale a fight. His eyes flickered open when she knelt. "Ma'am," he whispered, voice thin. Took his hand, cold and trembling in her gloves. "You're still here," she said softly. He tried to smile, but it faltered. His lips moved, but no words came. She squeezed his hand once before the medic leaned over, adjusting tubes, eyes urgent. stood, her chest heavy. She couldn't stay. If she stayed too long, they would see too much. She walked on, past the wounded, past the silent, past the ones who looked at her as if she carried answers she didn't have. At the edge of the line, she paused. The desert stretched endless in every direction. No movement, no lights, only emptiness, yet she didn't trust it, not for a second. She pulled her map again, though the paper was barely legible. She traced their route with a finger, the ink smudged into meaningless lines. She blinked hard, trying to see order in chaos. Behind her, the medic's voice rose, sharp, desperate. A soldier groaned in pain. Another shouted for more bandages, closed her eyes briefly. Then she forced them open. Because leadership didn't allow collapse. A voice came from behind. The gunner. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice rough, "we can't take another hit like that." She turned to him. His face was pale under the dust, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling. He wasn't challenging her. He was confessing. She met his gaze. "We'll make it through," she said. He shook his head slightly. "How?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him the truth, that she didn't know, that she was as afraid as he was, that every order she gave felt like gambling with lives she couldn't afford to lose. But she couldn't. So she gave him what he needed, because we don't have another choice. He nodded, but his eyes told her he understood the truth she hadn't spoken. Looked back at the horizon. The desert seemed endless, the ridges waiting like silent predators. She thought of the villagers again, their stillness, their silence. She thought of the gunship, its power, its danger, its absence. And she wondered what the next silence would bring. The engines rumbled low behind her, steady but tired. The convoy would move again soon. It had to. Stopping too long was death. Pressed her scarf, her breath fogging inside it. She whispered to herself, words no one else could hear. Clarity, not certainty. It was the only truth she could hold on to. She turned back to her vehicle, climbed inside, and pressed the headset tight against her ears once more. The radio was quiet, for now. But quiet was always a liar. How many times could order survive before it finally fractured? The convoy moved again under the cover of night, engines humming low, their headlights covered in filters that turned the desert into shadow upon shadow. Dust drifted behind each vehicle, but the wind carried it away quickly, erasing their trail as if the earth wanted no memory of them. Sat forward in her seat, headset pressed tight, her map folded across her lap, though it was too ruined to read clearly anymore. She didn't need the lines. She carried the terrain in her head now, carved into her mind with every explosion, every cry over the radio. The soldiers were quieter than before, quieter than she liked. Silence wasn't peace. Silence was weight, and weight could crush. Her gunner muttered something under his breath, a prayer or a curse she couldn't tell. She didn't ask. The road narrowed again, winding between low hills, jagged rocks rising like broken teeth. Her chest tightened. These were ambush lanes, they all knew it. The driver asked in a low voice, "Ma'am, you think they'll hit us again tonight?" She didn't answer right away, not because she didn't know, but because the truth didn't matter. Whether they struck or not, they had to move as if danger was certain. Anything less would be suicide. Finally she said, "Eyes on the ridges, drive steady. If they come, we meet it head-on." He nodded once, tightened his grip on the wheel. The radio crackled with a faint voice from the rear, one of the squads reporting movement, shapes, shadows on the ridge. His heart beat faster, but her reply was steady. "Copy, eyes on, hold fire until positive." Minutes dragged into eternity. Every stone looked like a muzzle flash waiting to ignite. Every shadow looked alive. Then nothing, no fire, no explosion, just wind hissing across rock. Her throat tightened. Were they being watched, herded, or had exhaustion made ghosts of their vision? She gave the order to push faster. Better to gamble with speed than crawl into another kill zone. Engines roared louder, the convoy stretching, dust trailing behind them like smoke. And then it came. The first impact wasn't an explosion, it was a scream. A voice over the radio, raw with panic. "They're here, left ridge." Gunfire erupted immediately, tracers slicing down from above. Muzzle flashes burst from the rocks, bright against the night. Bullets sparked off armor, clanged against glass, kicked up dirt inches from soldiers diving behind their wheels. The convoy fractured into chaos. Gunners opened fire, their barrels glowing as they raked the ridges in sweeping arcs. The night lit with violent flashes, dust and fire painting the air in furious rhythm. His chest clenched, but her voice cut through. "Suppress, maintain spacing, keep forward momentum." Her driver floored the accelerator, the MRAP jolting hard as it bounced over ruts and rocks. Soldiers inside braced themselves, rifles tight, eyes wide. The ridges lit with a second wave of fire, heavier this time. Rockets screamed down, one slamming into a truck mid-column. The blast lifted it sideways, flame bursting out as its wheels spun uselessly in the air before crashing down. Shouts filled the radio. Snapped her voice higher, forcing steel into it. "Dismount! Left flank fire teams sweep that ridge now. Gunners hold suppression right." Her words wove through panic, thin but strong, a thread pulling men and women back into rhythm. Another explosion rocked the ground, this time behind her vehicle. Shrapnel tore into the dust, pinging off steel. Her gunner screamed down that his weapon was jammed. Brass had locked. She didn't hesitate. "Clear it, switch to sidearm until you're up." She grabbed the radio, demanding mortar fire from the rear, her throat raw. Her voice cracked once, but she pushed harder, sharper, louder until they obeyed. Mortars thumped, arcs cutting through the night before slamming into the ridges. Explosions tore rock into fragments, muzzle flashes vanishing in bursts of fire. For a heartbeat, the valley lit like daylight. And then darkness returned. His breath came fast, ragged. She forced it slow, forced her hands steady on the map, though she wasn't even looking at it anymore. She needed them to believe she had control, even if control was slipping through her fingers like dust. The radio filled with screams again. A squad was pinned on the left, one man hit, the medic crawling under fire. Barked suppression orders, her heart pounding as she pictured them dragging their comrade across rock under fire that never let up. Her gunner shouted down, weapon clear. He opened fire again, the roof vibrating with each burst, brass raining like a storm. His voice was hoarse but alive. Closed her eyes for a breath, let the sound of his weapon steady her. Then she opened them, sharp, focused. Her voice cut the radio again. "Convoy push. Break the kill zone now. Drivers drive through. Sweep fire on ridges left and right. Do not stop." Engines roared as trucks lurched forward, some swerving, some limping but still moving. Soldiers fired from hatches and windows, their bursts carving desperate arcs into the rocks. The ridges finally began to thin, the road widening as the convoy surged forward. Enemy fire grew weaker, sporadic, their coordination breaking under the mortar and machine gun rhythm forced them into. And then, as suddenly as it began, the fire faded. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. The convoy rolled into open ground, smoking, bleeding, but intact. Slumped forward, headset still pressed against her ears, though the radio was quiet. Her hands shook, sweat stinging her eyes, dust grinding against her teeth. They had survived again. But survival no longer felt like triumph. It felt like debt. She looked at her soldiers, their silhouettes faint in the dark, their shoulders slumped, their weapons hanging heavy. She saw the medic's hands, stained and trembling as he bound wounds by red light. She heard the coughs, the groans, the silence of those who would never speak again. And she knew the truth she could never say aloud. Each time they survived, the weight grew heavier, and one day it would crush her. But not tonight. Tonight her voice had held. And as long as it did, they would keep moving through dust and fire, chasing a horizon that never promised safety. What happens when the voice that holds everyone else together begins to crack? The convoy had pushed through, engines still rumbling, but the night carried a weight heavier than any ambush. Open desert stretched ahead, endless and cold, but safety felt like a word from another language. Soldiers slumped in their seats, rifles loose, helmets tilted back, their faces pale and hollow. Sat rigid in the commander's seat, headset pressed so tight it dug into her skin. Her hands trembled against the map in her lap. The paper was torn, soaked with sweat and blood, the lines blurred into nothing. She stared at it anyway, as if it might still anchor her. Her throat burned, each breath shallow. She hadn't stopped giving orders since the first explosion hours ago. Even when the fighting paused, her voice had carried them. And now, in the silence, she realized how much of herself she had poured out and how little was left. Her driver glanced at her, eyes lingering too long before snapping back to the road. He saw it. They all did, the cracks forming. The way her voice faltered for half a beat before snapping sharp again. The weight she tried to hide but couldn't. The radio hissed faintly, then went quiet. Static was louder than words. She closed her eyes just for a moment, and the images returned. The first fireball swallowing the lead vehicle, the screams over the radio, the medic dragging bodies through dust, the gunship circling overhead, salvation and threat in the same shadow. And then the soldier's eyes. The young man she had knelt beside, his chest wrapped in blood, whispering her title with his last strength. "Ma'am." She hadn't been able to stay. She hadn't been able to answer him. His face followed her now, etched in the haze of memory. Her chest clenched. She pressed her gloved hand against it as if to hold herself together. A voice crackled over the radio, breaking through. "Ma'am, status." She froze. She wanted to answer, but her throat locked. The words stuck. For the first time tonight, her silence stretched too long. Her gunner called down, his voice low but urgent. "Orders, ma'am." She forced herself to breathe, forced air into her lungs, forced words past her throat. "Maintain spacing. Keep eyes on the ridges." Her voice was steady again, but thinner, fragile. The gunner didn't question it. He didn't need to, he knew. The convoy rolled on but felt herself sinking. Each mile stretched longer than the last, each breath heavier. She pressed her forehead against the armored glass, the cold seeping through her skin. Why was she here? Why had she chosen this? Her mind drifted back years, to the briefing table where she had been ignored, her voice drowned by louder men, to the nights of training where she had been dismissed, told she was too cautious, too quiet, too unsure. She had carried all of that like fuel. She had turned silence into strength. But strength had a cost. And now, staring into the endless desert, she wondered if she had been wrong. If strength was only another kind of silence, one that demanded you bury your fear until it consumed you. She thought about home, about the face of her sister years younger, always asking why I had chosen this life. She had never answered truthfully. She had said words like duty, honor, leadership. But the truth was simpler. She had wanted to prove them wrong, to prove herself right. But at what cost? She blinked hard, forcing the memories back. This wasn't the time. She couldn't afford to break now. The convoy slowed as the road curved along another ridge. The driver's voice broke the silence. "Ma'am, we're low on fuel." She turned to him. His face was pale in the dim light, his lips cracked, eyes hollow. He looked older than he had this morning. They all did. She answered evenly, "We'll make it, we have to." But inside, her gut twisted. They were stretched thin. Ammunition, fuel, morale, everything running dry. The radio cracked again, a different voice this time, a squad leader. "We're running on fumes, ma'am. Some of my men, they're done. They can't fight again tonight." His chest tightened. She wanted to tell him to rest, to promise no more ambushes, no more fire, no more silence that led only to screams. But promises were lies here, and she refused to lie. Her answer was clipped. We hold until morning, then we push again." The radio clicked silent. She imagined the squad leader staring at the ground, nodding with resignation. He would obey, but obedience wasn't the same as belief. The night deepened. Stars burned sharper above, cold and indifferent. The desert stretched endless, but to it felt smaller, as if the sky itself was pressing down. She wanted to cry, just once, but tears had no place here, not when her soldiers might hear them, not when silence could carry more weight than any order. Instead, she whispered to herself, soft, almost soundless, "Clarity, not certainty." The words steadied her, not much, but enough. The convoy rolled on, engines groaning, soldiers silent. And sat in her seat, headset pressed tight, her voice waiting to rise again when the storm returned. Because it would, it always did. How much strength could one voice carry before it finally broke? The desert was still, too still. The convoy moved slow, cautious, engines groaning under the weight of exhaustion. Soldiers sat in silence, their faces hollow, their hands trembling as they clutched rifles they no longer believed in. Leaned forward in her seat, headset pressed so tight it felt like it had fused to her skull. Her throat was raw, every word she had given through the night scraping her voice until speaking felt like bleeding. Yet she stayed ready. She had to. The map on her lap was ruined, a smear of lines and stains that no longer resembled the terrain. She didn't need it anymore. She carried the battlefield inside her chest, every ridge, every choke point, every place where silence turned into fire. The radio hissed once, then went quiet. Her gut twisted. Silence was never peace. Silence was the inhale before the scream. The driver shifted in his seat. "Ma'am," he whispered, "it feels wrong." She didn't answer, she didn't need to. He was right. The ridges closed in again. The road narrowed. The convoy crawled forward like prey entering the jaws of something patient and merciless. And then it came. The night ripped open. Rockets screamed down from the ridges, exploding against the road, hurling dust and fire into the air. Muzzle flashes burst in every direction, tracers slicing through the dark. The ambush was full, final, merciless. The convoy reeled. Soldiers shouted, gunners fired upward, engines roared as drivers swerved, but the kill zone had closed around them. His chest seized, her voice burst out anyway. "Return fire, suppress both ridges, do not stop." Her MRAP rocked under impacts, armor sparking with ricochets. Her gunner screamed down, unloading his weapon in violent bursts. Brass rained across the roof, the night alive with fire and chaos. The radio filled with panic, one squad begging for cover, another shouting they were overrun, a driver screaming his vehicle was hit, voices layered, desperate, drowning. Press the handset so hard it bit into her skin. Hold sectors, left flank sweep now, gunners rake the ridges full. Her words cut through, thin, fragile, but enough. Soldiers obeyed, guns shifted. Mortars thumped from the rear, arcs glowing faint before slamming into the slopes. Explosions tore rock and dust, enemy fire stuttering. But the enemy pressed harder. They knew this was their chance. Their fire was relentless, disciplined, merciless. His throat burned as she screamed into the radio, her voice cracking but still sharp. She shifted squads, redirected gunners, forced the convoy forward inch by inch. And then the worst sound. The gunner above her screamed. His weapon fell silent. She looked up, heart hammering. He slumped against the hatch, blood streaking his vest, his helmet slipping sideways. "Gun down," someone shouted. His body moved before her mind caught up. She climbed the hatch ladder, dust and heat blasting her face, bullets snapping past as she grabbed the heavy weapon. Her hands burned on the metal, her arms straining as she swung it toward the ridges. She fired. The recoil jolted her body, the roar deafening, the brass raining down in a storm. Tracers carved arcs across the night, hammering enemy positions in savage rhythm. She felt every vibration in her bones, every shot tearing her strength thinner. The radio screamed in her ear, but she didn't hear the words anymore. She was the weapon now, her voice and her hands one with the storm. She kept firing until her throat tore with a scream, until her arms shook, until the ridges cracked under the combined thunder of mortars, rifles, and her gun. And then silence. Enemy fire faltered. Shadows broke, retreating between rocks. Tracers faded. The ridges emptied into stillness. The convoy slowed, engines groaning, soldiers slumping in their seats. The medic crawled to the fallen gunner, hands working fast, face streaked with blood and dust. Dropped into her seat, her body trembling, her chest heaving. Her gloves were burned, her shoulders aching, her throat raw. She felt hollow, drained, emptied. But her voice had carried them again. The radio crackled faintly. A squad leader reporting, enemy retreating, convoy intact, casualties contained. Closed her eyes. She wanted to collapse, to cry, to scream, but she didn't. Instead, she whispered into the handset, her voice hoarse but steady. Maintain spacing. Push forward. We're not stopping here. The convoy obeyed, slowly, broken but alive. The desert opened wide again, stars burning cold above. Engines droned steady, carrying them forward into darkness. Leaned her head against the armored glass, her breath fogging against it. She thought of the soldiers they had lost, the ones who had whispered her title with their last strength, the ones who had dragged, wounded through dust, the ones who had obeyed her voice even when it trembled. She thought of silence, how it always came before fire, how it always came after survival, how it never truly left. Her chest ached, her eyes burned, her body screamed for rest, but her voice had held. And sometimes that was enough. She whispered into the silence, words no one else could hear. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The engines carried the convoy forward, the desert swallowed their trail. And the night closed around them once more.